Good evening, everyone. My name's Anne Hollonds, and I'm Australia's National Children's Commissioner. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight to welcome you to our webinar, Reinventing Schools to Support Learning and Wellbeing for All. I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us this evening. Before I introduce our guests to you, I need to do some housekeeping. So in this session, you, the audience members, will be muted and your cameras will be turned off. At the end of the discussion, we'll address questions from the audience. So if you think of a question during the discussion, please just pop it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen along the way, and we'll be collecting your questions. Auslan interpretation's available on screen. You can probably see Leanne there now. And you can turn on closed captions by clicking on the closed captions button on your screen. If you have any technical problems, we think you could just leave the webinar and try and rejoin. That might be the best way. So thank you all for joining us today in Budget Week. So in between the two budget speeches, we thought this was a good time to be thinking about how we want government to spend our money to prioritise child health, learning and wellbeing. Some would argue that currently schools are operating on mid-last century models that are no longer fit for purpose for the increasingly complex needs of children and their families in 2023. Tonight, we'd like to stimulate discussion about reimagining what schools could be, and to ask big questions like, well, what is the purpose of schools? And who are schools meant to be for? We know from OECD research that children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to feel that they belong at school. And many children living with poverty and disadvantage have told me that they don't feel welcome or safe at school. So why is this? And what does this say about the role of the school in the lives of our children? And could schools be reinvented so that they're fit for purpose for all children, not just those from wealthier families? Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to two brilliant academics and thought leaders. Professor Sharon Goldfeld is a paediatrician, researcher and policy advisor on child development and health equity. She's the director of the Centre for Community Child Health at the Royal Children's Hospital and theme director for population health at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And she's got extensive experience as a senior policymaker in both health and education, including as principal medical advisor at the Victorian Department of Education and Training. And she's on lots of really important advisory groups for government right now, including the National Early Years Strategy Advisory Group. Professor Pasi Sahlberg is a teacher, academic and global thought leader from Finland. He has advised schools and education system leaders around the world. Pasi is a recipient of several awards from around the world for his lifelong service in education, and he's had several books published, which I highly recommend. His forthcoming book is called Post-Digital Child, The Coming Golden Age of Low-Tech Childhood, and I look forward to that one. Pasi is currently Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Melbourne in Sydney. And tonight is a very special night because Sharon and Pasi are launching a new discussion paper called Reinventing Australian Schools for the Better Wellbeing, Health and Learning of Every Child. And this will be available to you via email after the webinar. So it's my privilege to warmly welcome you both this evening, Pasi and Sharon. And
thanks, Anne.
So lovely to see you. And so I'm going to start with some big questions. So first of all, why do you think we need to reinvent schools? And what does this actually look like? Who'd like to start?
You can go first, Pasi, and I'll follow you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, first of all, thanks for the acknowledgement of the country, and thank you for your wonderful work that you do, including hosting this webinar. And before I say anything else, I also want to thank my colleague Sharon and 3 other people, Cecilia, Caitlin, and John, who has been part of this work. So without you, this would have never happened. And I think it's really, and it's a great first question, that why do we need to reimagine or reinvent schools? And deliberately we didn't want to use the word reform schools, because we have been trying to reform schools for so long. And I think one reason we need to think differently through this reinvention is that that we have, as we write in the paper, that things are not really getting any better if we look at our children, whether it's about their well-being, health, or learning, that things have been over time just either stayed stagnant or getting worse. The other thing is that during the course of the last 20 years or so here in Australia, we have tried almost everything that you can imagine to improve our schools and probably improve health as well. I'll leave it to Sharon to talk about that. And these old ways don't seem to work. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I think the third reason why we need to think about this reinventing education and reinventing our schools is, as you said, and that everything has changed. Not only the young people are very much different than they used to be, but also the world is very different right now. It's much more complex, and children come to school every day with a much more complex situations and diversity. And many of us, we believe that the old school that we used to have, that was very much focusing on teaching reading and writing, that are absolutely critically important thing, but it's often stayed there. It's not enough anymore, and that's what young people and their parents understand, that if we aim at providing everybody, all our young ones, with the skills and knowledge and minds that will promise them a good life in the future, we understand that we need to have a very different approach to helping these young people to get there. Education is one part of that. We need a different type of education. And then, of course, the health and well-being is something that has become increasingly important. And this is probably a good way to throw a ball to Sharon now to speak about, how you see this thing from the health and well-being expert perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Pasi. And also, thank you very much, Anne, for hosting this seminar. And as Pasi said, we're not soloists here. We've got a great team behind us. But it's probably worth just harking back to why Pasi and I even started talking about this in the first instance. And one have these sort of moments in life where you kind of go, how did it take me so long to get here? So when I was working in the Department of Education, I was really the first principal medical advisor that ever had. And it was a real eye-opener for me, like, how is it possible that this entire industry of professionals cared about the same children I cared about as a health professional, and yet we'd never really thought about how we kind of get together to do something quite different together. And in health, I see these children, I'm still a practicing pediatrician. I see these kids for, I don't know, half an hour every 6 months. How am I possibly going to make a difference to that child's life in a meaningful way? But, they go to school 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 40 weeks a year. Schools are the most powerful platform that we have for making. There is just nothing else apart from families themselves that actually can make a difference to children's lives. And where I guess Pasi and I came together was, how is it possible that children are spending all that time there, that we've got so much invested? And yet frustratingly, and I say frustratingly because I think everybody's frustrated, that we're unable to shift the dial, particularly on inequities in children's education or actually health outcomes. So it kind of struck us both that maybe this is a fabulous platform that we could actually reinvent to deliver on our mutual aspirations, which was equitable outcomes for children's health, well-being and learning. And one of the things Pasi and I talked about very early on is that we were not going to be academics that rode in on our white horses to say, oh, thank goodness we're here. We've got all the answers. Don't worry, we're here. But that actually we wanted to start a conversation without necessarily knowing where that conversation would go, and pay respect to all the people and all the expertises out there that might be needed to be brought to bear to really think about how would you reinvent schools? What would that look like? And how would you get there from where we are if we were to deliver on equitable outcomes for kids? And that's kind of how we kind of started on this journey.
That's so interesting to me that you've both come from different disciplines and kind of landed in the same place. And out of that can come, you know, I guess some really interesting ideas. And just one other comment from me. When you were talking, Pazzi, about the, you know, the old ways, just my mind went to when my little grandson started kindergarten, and he went from a really gorgeous preschool, which was really nurturing and had a lot of richness and about it, to what was exactly the same kindergarten environment as I had many decades ago. And I thought, could this be true? Could this be true that, you know, in 2020, I think that was the year, you know, my grandson is getting exactly what I had so many years ago. That's how little, in some places, things have changed despite all of the changes around us in the world. So, you know, it's really, really quite interesting that we haven't been able to shift the dial any further than that, despite the need. So I'm going to pose some questions to you that I think, you know, some challenges. I'm going to throw some challenges to you. One of them is that I know that there are many people, including parents and educators, who would say that school, and particularly a good school, is one where students are achieving well academically, that they're getting good test scores. And we often hear in Australia talk about how we're doing against the PISA ratings, as you know. So they wrong to think that? Is that wrong thinking? And where does academic achievement fit with your vision?
I'm going to throw to Pazzi in a minute, but I want to say something first, because I think it depends which parents and which children you're talking to about these sorts of things. So I can tell you a number of the children that we're thinking about or seeing, which are children with developmental and behavioural and learning difficulties. Those parents aren't coming and talking to me about those kids having great academic outcomes. They want their kids to be happy. They want them to be connected to school. They want them to be having friends. That's their goals. And it's not that they don't want them to do well academically, but that's not the primary driver. And I do think that I think that's all fine when everything's going well. But remember, 1 in 5 children are turning up to school with some sort of emerging health or developmental need. And we know that from the Australian Early Development Census. So that's not, you know, a couple of kids. That's a lot of kids turning up each year with these kind of additional needs. And, you know, schools are having to think through how they respond to all of those things. And for many of those parents, really what they want is for those kids kind of to be happy and engaged and enjoying school. And that means everything has to be going well. Academics have to be going well. Friendships have to be going well. Their own sense of well-being has to be going well. Their sense of engagement, all of those boxes have to be ticked. So I think we've kind of got these dissonances depending on which parents. I mean, I know many parents of children with a disability would say the same thing. So, you know, I think we have to be careful we don't just broad brush what we think parents think, but Pazzi's out there talking much more than me. So Pazzi, over to you.
No, I fully agree with you, what you're saying. And I think definitely there's nothing wrong with the parents who think that, you know, learning to read and write and do mathematics in school is the important thing. This is just a kind of a model of thinking that we all have had when we went to school. And there are parents who don't actually know any other type of school than what they had themselves. And that's why I think it's important that in this paper that we call, first of all, we call it a discussion paper. And it's deliberately called discussion paper because we think that the best way, and probably the only way to start this process of reinventing and reimagining school is to have the conversations. And the conversations here need to start from this question that what is a school for? Why do they go to school? And it's very quickly when we realize that I went to school to learn knowledge, the basic knowledge and skills so that I can go to high school and university. But that's not the issue anymore. There are many other things that the children need to learn, just like Sharon was saying that But I have my own children in the school, and for me, definitely the most important things are their connection to one another, and understanding the world and being happy and safe and healthy in a school. And of course, I'm saying at the same time that academics, the basic skills are important. But I think it's very important that nobody reads this report or listen when you listen to us, that we are saying that parents are wrong and schools are doing wrong things. I think here in Australia we have some of the best schools in the world I've ever seen anywhere. But at the same time, I'm saying that we could do differently. We could have schools that are more taking into consideration this whole child and kind of a holistic way of looking at education in general, and particularly what the children are. So this is just a kind of a part of the evolution when we are moving forward towards the kind of a future that nobody has an idea what the future will be like. But we believe that the conversation that focuses on more kind of a broader area of schooling and outcomes of schooling, including academics and well-being and health and other things, is probably the more promising way forward than staying in this old traditional way of thinking that school is a place where you just learn knowledge and skills, and then if you have any concerns about health and well-being, then there's another service somewhere else in the community that does that. We all think that just like Sharon was saying, that the school is the only place where we can assume that all young people go regularly, and where they work with adults and one another. And that's why I think this broader view of educational and health outcomes is something that we are talking about here.
So before we go on, I think our captioner is having trouble keeping up with us. So I think we need to slow down a little.
Okay.
Which is hard.
Sorry.
We're all fast talkers, I think. So, Pasi, you mentioned the whole child in your response just then, and I know that's one of the principles. You've got 5 principles in your paper, and one of them is that a whole child. We need a whole child and a whole school approach. I wonder if one of you could say a little bit more about what you mean by this.
Yeah, Sharon, can you speak about the whole child? Because both of this whole child and whole school are actually self-evident concepts. By whole school, we mean that everybody in the school should take the responsibility of all the children there, rather than what the schools are often doing now, is that the responsibilities are distributed to different adults, particularly when it comes to health and well-being in schools, that there are certain people who are responsible for those services. In the same way, there are people who are responsible for teaching mathematics and history and other things. In this whole school approach that we are talking about, we mean that we should be moving towards the understanding and practice where everybody, the school as a community, takes collectively responsibility of all of these things that are needed to raise the whole child. And now I pass this again to Sharon to speak a little bit about the whole child. What does it mean?
Yeah, and I just, as a follow-up to that, Pasi, I guess we're not saying that schools should just do more and more and more and more. I don't think we're suggesting that. And I think that's important, that we don't come out of this and we're going, well, teachers aren't doing enough, they need to do more and more and more. And I always think it's really challenging. The kids are really complex these days. Lives are complex. And any of you who has a child will know that life is complex, even in the best of circumstances with children. One of Pasi's passions he might talk about later is, the digital child, like the digital world these kids are coming into. Even if most parents are born into the digital world, still is hard to be a parent of a child these days. And so there's this complexity about being a child. And so the whole child, which means their health, development and learning, is a level of complexity that I don't think a single profession even can really just put up the hand and go, don't worry, we've got it covered. And so the challenge is like, who are the different professions and how the different professions, both in the school and the people outside the school, how does everybody kind of work together And that's the whole school approach and the whole child approach. That's all aspects of their development, their social, emotional, physical, and language, communication, the cultural aspects of life, the spiritual, all of those sorts of things. And I guess just reiterating, this is not, we need to cram in more curriculum, and it's really about taking a step back and saying, well, how would a school be organised if the whole school was in such a way organised that it could support all of that child's needs? And in particular, one of the things Pazzi and I are pretty passionate about is this idea of early intervention, giving the children what they need early in their schooling. And in the paper, we talk about this odd thing that we've got where we actually pay more per capita for children as they get older, as opposed to early intervention, which is more effective when children are younger. In fact, if we actually kind of front-ended our intervention system and our funding system where it ought to be, it'd be everything kind of up front and much less older. So, but if you look at education systems across the world, actually in all income countries, most of the money for children is spent in the sort of 14 to 17-year-old age group, even though all the intervention effectiveness is much earlier. So there's this opportunity in thinking about the whole child as actually meeting all those needs, but not necessarily putting it on teachers per se to meet all those needs. So that's where we get the marriage of the whole school and the whole child. And as I said, we're not exactly sure what that would look like, but I think the organising principle, that what would it look like if the whole school was involved in looking after all of that child's needs, that's the question we're putting on the table. What would that look like?
So I'm getting the impression from the way you describe it that this is quite a significant sort of turning things around. It's not just tinkering around the edges of models of schools. And some people would say, oh well, since COVID we've talked a lot more about well-being, and a lot of schools are now hiring mental health professionals maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I think Victoria has actually got a program of rolling this out in their state schools now. But I think you're talking about something much bigger than that. And in your paper, you say that you would like the ideas that you put forward to form a new starting place. I'm quoting you now, a new starting place for schools and our systems to rebuild around. So that's quite an aspirational statement. And I guess I'd put to you that a lot of educators and health professionals would already agree that health and well-being are critical to learning, and they maybe would agree with you, but we're all busy people. We're all busy doing things the way we've always done them, right? And the idea of disrupting long-standing structures and systems and the familiar patterns and behaviours and relationships that we have with each other across these systems, these all keep things the same. I've observed this many times, that there's a lot of good people out there that want things to be better, but somehow these things work against change. So my question to you, and it's not a small question, is how do we make change happen?
Well, the answer is 64, clearly. And I'm just going to start with just a couple of things and then hand over to Pazzi, really. But I think it's a really good question, and we're not suggesting these are greenfield sites. They're obviously, where we are, and nor do we want to undermine the great effort that's happening around the wellbeing stuff happening in schools. Like, that's great applause that's happening, but I think it's leading to this inflection point that we have in the history of schools. This inflection point that I think was accelerated by COVID, that said, holy crap, schools are really important. They keep children safe. They look after, they're about their well-being. And yes, they're also about their education. And plenty of people who are on this call now probably go, yeah, no kidding, we already knew that. But the at-scale revelation, like particularly in places like Victoria that had these massive, that was at-scale revelation about the importance of schools in keeping children's lives connected. And that kind of gives us an inflection point. And when you have these inflection points and these disruptions that already happened, so COVID, like, that was a major disruption, right? It kind of says, well, maybe we can tolerate disruption. And maybe this is this kind of inflection point where we go, maybe we could do things differently, and maybe not every school tomorrow, but maybe there are some schools out there. In fact, we know there are already schools out there that are doing things differently. And maybe we kind of need a permissive environment that allows that to happen and helps that grow. And Parsi's got some stories actually of schools that are doing things differently. So over to you, Parsi.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Exactly. During the course of the writing of this discussion paper, we spent actually quite a bit of time to try to identify good examples, and that was quite easy task actually, because there are a number of schools here in Australia. There are many schools. Some of them are featured in this paper here in Victoria, and the whole state of Victoria, as you said, Anne, is a good example of the progressive, forward-looking system of education where the well-being and health are brought into the kind of a front line of what the schools are doing. But at the same time, there are also education systems outside of Australia that have already had this type of practice of bringing education and health to one place that we call school for many, many years. And the experiences and research is quite convincing from those places. I guess going back to your question, Anne, that you ask about how should we start this, and this is a big, bold idea, which is true. I think, you know, one thing that we offer people to think about in this framework of reinventing schooling is to ask that, what if we were thinking about health and well-being, not only things that we make available in schools for those children who are at risk of losing health or not feeling well, but something that is an active set of skills that we systematically teach each and every child throughout the schooling. And that, I think, is a different way of looking at this whole thing of bringing well-being and health in schools as something that we can expect the different outcomes of that. The other thing is that we also present in the discussion paper, there's a lot of evidence that shows something that, again, is a self-evident fact, which is that when the children are healthier and feeling well, that they are also better learners. And it goes the other way around as well, that when the kids are learning better in school, they often also learn these skills that we include in the health and well-being. But we believe that, you know, as soon as we start to think about health and well-being, not only as something that we do in the schools to certain children, but think about them as active skills, future skills. I would call them actually some of the most essential 21st century skills. Then we begin to see the schools in a different light. And I know that there are people who say that, but wait a minute, the schools are already doing too many things and so many things, that how can we expect that the teachers and schools can do more? First thing is that we need to keep in mind that what we are talking about here is this whole school approach. So we are not looking at any particular individuals who should be doing more. We are looking at the school that is already doing these things, but we're just asking schools to think about whether these things could be done in a little bit different ways. And so that I know that this is the notion here, that some people are concerned that this will just add on the workload of the school. We have to be very careful with that one, because you know, that's not going to be a sustainable proposal. But we believe that thinking about this as doing what we do already in a little bit different ways is a good way forward.
So for everyone listening, we're going to come to your question shortly, but let me just pick up on that a little bit further. So do you think that that whole school approach can be done at the local school level, that the change can start to happen when perhaps the system that school's operating in, and the things that they say the principal of the school is rewarded for, you know, I believe it's things like, you know, they have to calculate how many kids turned up on time, that's one of their KPIs or something, you know, like I'm not an educator, but these are some of the things that I hear from parents that I talk to. You know, they're in a system that rewards certain indicators, but then, you know, you think that despite that, they can start working on this whole school idea?
Yeah, well, Parsi's got examples and I've got examples where we've worked with schools that are doing things differently. Are they off the spectrum different? Well, it's hard to be off the spectrum different, but they're different. They are thinking about how they work together. They are thinking about what they're doing for children, but often they're doing it despite the system. And that's one of the challenges about, and it's not an insubstantial challenge, is what's the kind of authorizing environment that would enable people to innovate. And for sure, what a school looks like in a rural town in Western Victoria might look very different to what a school looks like in the middle of metropolitan Sydney, which might look again different to, like, I don't think we're going to suggest that all schools should be the same, but I think we're suggesting that there's a scope now to do different. I don't think we want to wait for some special moment. And I guess what we're putting the call out is this a moment to experiment?
Oh, that's a nice way to put it. Pasi, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Sharon emptied my bank.
Okay, good.
Exactly the same thing. But just to underline this thing that there are already schools and good practices available around here, very nearby. So we are not we don't need to wait and invent anything new. It's more about reimagination and reinventing things than reforming or creating something new.
So before we move to the audience questions, I've got one quick one that's my personal issue that keeps me awake at night, and that's this statistic that I've seen of 20% of Australian 15-year-olds can't read or write at a level they need for daily life. So 20% have just totally been failed by the education system by the time they're 15. So the question in my mind is, how does a focus on health and well-being equally to academic learning, how's it going to help these kids who can't read or write at 15? Perhaps you could explain that.
Yeah, no, I think that, we just look at the evidence, and what the research is saying is that there's a direct link between the health, well-being and learning as well. It's interesting that Sharon said earlier that 1 in 5 Australian children go to school not with a kind of a serious or semi-serious well-being.
It starts early,
So we need to pay more attention to this early intervention and prevention as well, and start early, just like other systems. I'm from Finland, just like you, Anne, and the Finnish system is known among many other things about this early intervention, like really early, trying to identify the issues that may prevent and bring learning difficulties along the way. I think if we try to address these issues when it's too late, when they have already occurred, it's going to be too late. That's exactly why we are talking about this model of bringing health and well-being to schools early on, and then making sure that all the children, when they're in the school, that they're ready to learn in order to avoid these inconvenient situations later on.
Yeah. And in fact, in the Finnish schools, they expect to be able to be supporting about 30% of kids in the first few years of school. Like, that's the expectation. About 30% of kids will have some sort of additional need. It might be a medical need, a health need, a learning need, a behavioural need, a need because something at home, but about 30%. And that's probably about right. So to your point, those kids didn't not read when they got to 15. They didn't not read when they got to grade 2.
Yeah. And that's when they needed that extra help, as you're saying.
Sure.
I think we might move to some audience questions now. So my helpers, I've got to put them up on the screen. Okay, so first one. So I could say in advance, we've got a lot of people listening in. I may not be able to get to all of your questions, but I will give a shot we'll try to get to as many as we can. Can you provide some examples of what you mean by the whole school and schools doing things differently? Exactly what does this mean in practice? So perhaps a bit of a concrete example. I think, Pasi, you said you had some examples of what of that whole school approach. Can you give us maybe one brief example?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Sharon, because the schools here in we are both in Victoria here, so you know those better. But if I can, because I know I came to Australia 5 years ago from Finland, and I often regard Finland as a good example of this holistic, whole school, whole system, whole child approach to education. That for example, the absence of measures or indicators that are used to assess whether the student is successful or whether the school is successful, like in the Finnish system, doesn't have the NAPLAN type of thing that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
Provide schools and the system opportunities to look at children more holistically. So there's no way of schools or teachers saying that we need to put the priority on literacy and numeracy because those things are tested. So I think an important thing here in Australia, or any system where the performance of the schools is determined with a fairly narrow indicators like what we have here, is to make sure that we are not kind of limiting what the schools are doing into those criteria, but try to make sure that the schools have in their work that they see their work holistically and see the children holistically. But Sharon, you may probably have some concrete examples here, what it looks like and where the schools are doing this already.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, and we haven't. And so, just for anyone who's online who we haven't done a full school by school scoping, but I just want to reinforce Parsi's view about the measurement thing, because we measure what matters. And, it's really interesting how measurement drives the sorts of things that we do. And so, I guess the Productivity Commission and the school reform process is now asking us to think about what those measurements might look like. But of course, that's just a one-off national measure, which is great. But, there's lots of other measures one could use that could tell you much more often how your kids are doing in your school, and then what are the responses that might be needed that might have nothing to do with happens in the classroom. And I think one of the interesting models that's, small and maybe not quite scalable in its current form is Our Place, which is originally based in Doveton, which is a fairly lower income area in the southern metropolitan part of Melbourne, for those of you who don't know Melbourne very well. And a very innovative woman called June McLaughlin, who used to work with our Centre for Community Child Health, sort of really realised that there was this kind of unnatural divide between what children really needed and what was being offered in schools, and in particular, even starting like way back in childcare. And so has built this kind of 0 to 18 integrated approach as much as you can within the school system, where they've got kind of healthcare, early childhood education and care kind of all integrated in one place, and with schools integrated on the same site. And so there's two things that happen to that. Number one, children kind of enter school much more, and schools, so the kind of mutual readiness for schools, children ready to be there and schools ready for them, and much more prepared to think about the children with additional needs, because the services they need and the thinking they need to be able to address those needs is right there with them. So it's not, oh my goodness, I've got a kid with a behavioural difficulty. Like, I know what this is like for a teacher, and it's really challenging. I've got a kid with a behavioural challenge. I don't quite know what to do. Parents aren't necessarily engaged. It's really challenging. Like, we're not sitting here going, it's all easy. Why haven't we done it till now? So I think there are places like that are starting to think about things like integrated co-location. So it's not just we're sitting here, but we're actually all talking to each other. And, some of this, I ran a workshop at a principals conference, and I was amazed that anybody turned up, because here I was again, this paediatrician at a principals workshop talking about, health and wellbeing in schools. But a lot of principals came, and particularly primary school principals, and particularly principals in rural areas. And all they think about is how to meet the needs of the kids, because they are it. They are it for thinking about those kids. So how do we empower those really great thinking principals to think about how they're going to meet the needs of their children and bring to bear the community and how the community would like to do that, and get pretty innovative. How do we bring telehealth, digital health, how do we bring all those things so that we know, basically if kids are kicking goals, by the time they get to grade 3, they're kicking goals for life. That's the reality. And that's the challenge I'd like us to see. How do we organise schools so that we know kids are we do whatever we can do to ensure that kids are kicking goals by grade 3, and then we'll know we've got a whole different schooling system.
Great. I'm going to move on to some more questions. I'm going to throw two to you that you can sort of decide how to answer them. So one question is going to a potential link between teacher wellbeing and student wellbeing, and whether you think there's a link. And the other one is about what's the role of parents in this whole school approach.
Let me take Sharon, can I take the first one?
I was going to offer you the first one.
yeah, because it's a really great question. And in this discussion paper, we are one of these principles that we are using is to building the culture of health and well-being in the schools. And it's exactly about this issue that I say that we are not seeing health and well-being in the context of education, something that the adults that we do on children. That the key here is the building the culture of health, and there are many things that that school can do, and many schools are already doing. Sharon mentioned for example, the digital health, which is digital well-being. That is becoming a big issue everywhere right now. So what the schools can do is to kind of collectively build the culture of digital well-being or wellness in the school together with the adults and children. The other example of this type of culture in the school, and I know that this is a long shot to say here in Australia, but I believe that every school, certainly primary schools, should be serving healthy nutrition, healthy school lunch for free for all the children every day. And it's not only about nutrition, it's not only about giving children something to eat, it's about building this culture of health and well-being, using the school meal as a case for learning the importance of healthy eating, the importance of slowing down during the busy school day and having a conversation with other people. So they are, and I understand that this is something that will take time to implement, but there are countries around the world already that are doing this systematically. And there are many other things that the schools can do to build this culture of health that includes the well-being and health of adults and children alike in a school. Sharon, over to you.
Yes, and Paz and I would like to run a really large randomized control trial on giving kids some lunch in school. So watch this space, because it's a disruptor, right? You asked us, Anne, about disrupting. That sort of thing is a disruptor in terms of understanding what are these trickle down effects that you get from simply providing a meal to everyone. This isn't not the kids who can't afford it or the kids who are poor. It's a universal intervention. But I think the parent piece is so important, and you will know that parents often themselves have not had a great school experience always, and often feel quite intimidated by schools, and yet parents are the really great, amazing platform for making a difference for children's lives. And so we can't just kind of go, well, here's the school and here's the parents, but actually jointly, what's the kind of mutual goals they all have for these children? And depending on, your own experience, you might feel a bit us and them as a parent, but actually parents are the number one kind of people in children's lives that can do the sorts of things that teachers really like them to do at home. And yet, how are we having those conversations? What's the role of parents in co-designing what a school should look like to holistically meet that child's needs? Because the parents' part of wanting to meet that child's holistic needs as well. So I think the parent piece is absolutely vital. Our ability to build relationships, for teachers to build relationships, for schools to build relationships with parents is absolutely vital.
And it's interesting on the parent piece, one of the most heartbreaking things I heard in my consultations around Australia was in First Nations communities or in more remote areas of the country, where some of the parents said they felt they were pushed out of the school, that they were not welcome. And I just found that heartbreaking to hear, because, you know, they were such a resource that together with the school could wrap themselves around these kids, right? But, you know,
and
parents,
and the school can wrap itself around the parents as well.
yeah, that's right. So together they can do great things. But you know, I think there's a real opportunity there for the schools to think about, you know, how they embrace the families in their community. And of course, the schools need to be supported to do that.
You know, and in our place, they do quite innovative things. So that, you know, for example, they've got a number of refugee families, and so they bring them in to do lessons. They have got a mini kind of catering thing that they're doing. So they're actually trying to employ parents as well. So it's really this whole community. Like, it's all of our jobs to raise these kids, and these kids need to be, the parents need to be supported to do that more than anybody else. So again, that's that whole child, whole of school approach to raising kids.
And really, we need all of those hands on deck helping, don't we? We need everyone to be you know, on the job in that sense for our children. I also wanted to mention on the school meals, there was a survey I heard about of parents, that 80% of parents said that they'd be prepared to pay what the amount that they spend making lunches at home. They would be prepared to pay the school to provide the lunches. So this is the better off families who can afford it. And parents would love it, right? So I wonder if there is actually a bit of a sea change in attitudes. The younger parents have got different expectations now. Maybe we all are thinking a bit differently after COVID. I'm not sure.
And just to add to that, sorry, and just quickly, there's a movement in rural Victoria where they're actually doing the whole, farm to table for the kids. So local farmers are actually providing food into the schools for the kids, and the kids are talking about where does the food come from. It's all this sort of thing. So it's actually creating an industry, and the schools are paying the farmers for the children to have. So you're actually supporting the local industry as well as the children being able to eat nutrition. So you can actually create industries out of this. It's not just about let's do handouts. It's actually about creating industry. And
like in those remote areas I mentioned, that you could hire local parents to cook the meals, right? And so the kids would have friendly faces to make them feel more welcome at the school if there are those barriers. So there are all sorts of benefits. I'm trying to work out which last question to put to you, and I'm struggling a little bit to choose. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered while I'm scrolling through the final questions?
I have a question for Sharon.
Great.
You know, after
that wasn't part of the deal.
After all this thinking and work that we and our team has put into this discussion paper that we really invite everybody to take a look at. My question to you, Sharon, is that, so what could happen next?
That's a really good question. And by the way, Pazzi and I did this wonderful, well, Pazzi really did it, and I was just there, but on the panel, but Pazzi hosted this fantastic panel at the Opera House, which was probably the highlight of my career.
Thank you.
Being at the Opera House. And just so you officially know, we did sing Happy Birthday to the Opera House. So I have sung at the Opera House. And if you knew how I sing, you'd understand the irony of that particular comment. But, you know, Pazzi, I've been involved with quite a lot of things. And one of the really great things about this is that you and I are not trying to dictate too much here. We're trying to create sensible provocations and then putting this discussion paper out and getting people to talk about it. We're hoping to do some roundtables later in the year so we can get more people talking about it without sort of saying, yes, let's do this. We would like to do that randomized control trial. But other than that, and I think the next steps is everybody who's on here and everybody who's registered will send you the paper, share it with your friends, share it with your colleagues, share it with your schools, share it with each other, and start innovating. And what we'd love is if you tell us what sort of innovations you're doing. And we're hoping to create, in the first instance anyway, a bit of a movement for innovation rather than, you know, I'm sure there are fantastic educationalists or even maybe policymakers on the line here. I'm thinking, oh, hang on, maybe we don't need to sort of change the whole world tomorrow, but maybe we could just do a little thing that starts doing things differently. And that's how that's how change is going to happen. I don't think we're going to down tools and change everything tomorrow, but maybe we can just change things a little bit. And that's how health changed, by the way. So 100 years ago, hospitals were just nurses and doctors. There was no one else there. All the children were in one big giant room. Kids died. It was pretty awful. And healthcare was all just about hospitals. There was hardly anything in the community. And you can see how health has evolved over that time. So I think, these evolutions can happen. But they take the great kind of people that are online today to kind of make that sort of evolution happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I think about this is that if not now, then when is the right time to do this? And even probably more importantly, if it's not us, everyone who is part of this conversation now, so who is going to do this? So we are not putting forward any ideas that we expect somebody else to, come up with a solution and money and resources to do this. This is up to us now. And just like Sharon was saying, that the good way to start this is to take this conversation in your own homes, your dinner table, your meetings with the friends, your schools and workplaces, and begin with the same question that we started more than a year ago, that what would Australian school look like if we were doing things in a little bit different way? And that can be the starting point for something new.
I just love the way that you both put that you make it sound very accessible, that, we just can have these conversations and maybe when we get your paper, we can share it with our friends and family and, and at the local PNC and so forth, and really get that conversation going, as you say. Now, I don't know if we've got any kids online tonight. I didn't think to ask earlier, but we do have a question that I'd like to put to you about kids, the voices of kids in this whole endeavour. I don't know if you've given a thought to how kids could get involved, but over to you.
Yes. We talked about co-design, what things, and as I said to you, these principals that I was talking to at this conference, they were really keen to bring the voice of children into what schools should look like. And I know Parsi's got some experience about this as well, because kids have fabulous ideas about, they all want to learn, they all want to be part of this. They don't not want to. And they also have some great ideas that sometimes you might go, oh, all right. But, you could test them. Like one group of kids wanted to bring dogs to school. Well, actually, there's probably some good evidence that bringing a dog to school is quite good for kids. So, there's things you would go, well, there's no randomized controlled trials for that. I'm a big trialist, but it doesn't matter because these kids are kind of trial something. They're going to do their own experiments to say, what would be that like? So if we're not co-designing, like we talk about co-design with community, why wouldn't we co-design schools with kids? That's their community.
And the fact is that probably on the top list of the concerns that young people, including children today, have is their well-being and health. And so as soon as we give them voice, and even more than that, as soon as we invite them to this co-design of what the future school will be, this will be one of the top things that the young people are thinking about. And there's a good friend of mine probably listening to this conversation as well, who always reminds me that the young people have much more capabilities and capacities to do great things that we give them credit for. And this is one of them, certainly, that we cannot get this thing done. We cannot fulfill this dream without having children and young people as our partners.
Well, that's great, and I agree with you. Often kids, they don't have the same barriers in terms of thinking about the possibilities. That they don't filter the opportunities in the way that we adults tend to. We think about what can't be done. I think we're going to start to wrap up now. There's one other question. I'll see if we can deal with this quickly. There was someone who posted a question earlier. He or she says, I work with kids with mental health problems who often feel unsupported by school. So it sounds like it's a counsellor who's working outside the school and finds the school unsupportive. How can schools and health work together better to support these kids?
And that's really what this is all about, really. And it's exactly what our kind of whole session has been about, and what we're trying to do here, which is exactly answer the question, how do we work better across sectors, across professions to do better for kids? Because there are kids with all these additional needs out there, and schools could be, the sorts of places that make those children feel welcome, that can address those needs. We don't have to necessarily ship them out to get all these needs met. And I do think a school that can meet kids' needs, listen to kids, meet kids' needs, and as I said, and give them kicking goals by the time they're grade 3. Because, if a kid's not doing well, they've disengaged from school by grade 3, by the way. They don't disengage in high school. Because I would say to people, if you're not doing well at school and you don't find school a welcoming place, if that was your job, if you weren't doing well in your job and you knew you weren't doing well in the job and people told you weren't doing well in your job, you'd leave your job. So that's what kids are doing, by the time they get to grade 3. So I'm just such a believer that, if we can wrap things around schools and families and communities, and that kids are really feeling like, wow, this is a school that I'm part of, that is making a difference for me, and families can feel that too. I just think we'd be in a whole different place. And, we'd be in a pretty different place pretty quickly if we're willing to, innovate and do things a bit differently. So we don't have to wait forever to do it.
Yeah, and guess what? Australia is not the only country where we are having this conversation. This is the same conversation is taking place everywhere. And I would like to see us, this nation that has an excellent health system and education system as well, taking a lead in this very question as well. So I think that's why it's even a stronger call for action for all of us.
So in a way, to that questioner, what you're proposing, your vision, would actually take that problem away, because there would be a way of working holistically across those service types. The school would see its role differently, and you wouldn't have to feel like you were battling the school, which is what sometimes those who work outside the school feel. Look, I'm going to wrap up now. This has been a fabulous conversation, and you've Pasi and Sharon, you so generously shared your time and your insights. I think everyone, I speak for everyone and say thank you. That I feel very inspired by having heard you elaborate your ideas a little more, and make it feel like it is kind of within our hands. It's within reach. And as you say, Australia's got a lot of good things going for it. We're not starting from as low a base as perhaps sometimes we feel, but we perhaps don't really use the potential that we have with the system resources that we have, that perhaps we're too ready to settle for second best. And hearing from you what some visions of how it could be different, I think it has been inspiring for everybody. You've already talked to us about what we could do. I think that, I'm going to take it on to talk to my family. Oh, well, I hope my family's listening. Actually, I invited them all. So if they haven't, I'm going to, take the discussion paper to them and say, let's talk about this. But I hope everyone's got some actions that they can take away tonight. I'm going to say some quick other thank yous. To Social Deck, who generously provided us pro bono support for this webinar. Thank you to Lucy Smith and the comms team at the Australian Human Rights Commission. And a big thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening. I think what we've heard is that change is possible and it's in our hands. We need to amplify our collective voices. We need to speak up about this. We need to build the momentum ourselves, really, through our networks. And I think it can be done. So we'll be sending you an email, as I said, with a link to Pasi and Sharon's discussion paper, which you can share. There'll be a link to this webinar as well, which will be on the Commission's YouTube channel. And when I say goodbye, there'll be a slide that comes up, and there's a QR code there, which I believe will also take you immediately in a fantastic new tech kind of way to the discussion paper. So you don't actually have to wait for the email. Those of you who know how to we all know how to do QR codes now, of course. So look, thank you again, Pasi and Sharon. What a fabulous evening it's been. On behalf of everyone, thank you for tonight. And thank you, everyone who's joined in, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Pazzi.